Imagine a film so visually stunning that it invented techniques filmmakers still use today. A work so groundbreaking that it earned international acclaim and prestigious awards. Now imagine that same film was commissioned by Adolf Hitler, funded by the Nazi regime, and premiered as a gift for the Führer's birthday. This is Olympia, and for nearly 90 years, it has forced us to confront one of art's most uncomfortable questions. Can a masterpiece be evil? The film's director, Leni Riefenstahl, became one of cinema's most divisive figures. To some, she was a visionary artist who transformed documentary filmmaking. To others, she was a willing propagandist who lent her talents to history's most murderous regime. The truth, as we'll discover, may be even more complicated. In this documentary, we'll dissect both the brilliance and the darkness. We'll examine the revolutionary techniques that changed cinema. We'll trace the invisible threads connecting artistic choices to Nazi ideology. And ultimately, we'll ask whether Olympia's undeniable artistry can ever be separated from its propaganda roots. But first, we need to understand the world that created this film. A world where the Olympics themselves became a weapon, and a stadium became a stage for the greatest propaganda spectacle ever produced. August 1936. Berlin has been transformed. The city that just 3 years earlier had been plastered with anti-Semitic posters now welcomes the world with manicured gardens and spotless streets. The signs reading "Jews not wanted" have been temporarily removed. This is the Nazi regime's grand deception. When Berlin won the Olympic bid in 1931, Germany was still a democracy. By the time the Games arrived, Adolf Hitler had been in power for 3 years. The Nuremberg laws had stripped Jews of citizenship. Political opponents filled concentration camps. But to the outside world, the Nazis presented a different face. Hitler initially dismissed the Olympics as a Jewish invention. He had no interest in hosting what he called an international circus. But Joseph Goebbels, his propaganda minister, saw an opportunity that Hitler could not. This would be a chance to showcase the new Germany to 49 nations and legitimize Nazi rule on the world stage. The scale was unprecedented. Germany built the largest stadium in the world, seating over 100,000 spectators. They pioneered live television broadcasts. They created the first Olympic torch relay, a tradition we still follow today, though most people don't know its Nazi origins. There were calls to boycott. The Amateur Athletic Union in America nearly voted to withdraw. But Avery Brundage, head of the American Olympic Committee, visited Berlin, accepted Nazi assurances at face value, and insisted the Games proceed. His decision would haunt the Olympic movement for decades, and so, on August 1st, 1936, Adolf Hitler declared the Games of the 11th Olympiad open. 100,000 spectators raised their arms in the Nazi salute. The Hindenburg airship floated overhead trailing the Olympic flag. Cannons fired. Pigeons were released. It was, by design, the most spectacular opening ceremony in Olympic history. But the Nazis needed more than a ceremony. They needed a permanent record, a film that would immortalize their triumph and carry their message to audiences who couldn't attend. For this crucial task, Hitler turned to a 33-year-old woman who had already proven she could transform political rallies into cinematic art. Leni Riefenstahl was born in Berlin in 1902 to a middle-class family. Her father, a plumber, had conventional expectations for his daughter. She had other ideas. From childhood, Leni was drawn to movement, beauty, and the spotlight. She trained as a dancer, performing across Europe until a knee injury ended her career. Rather than retreat, she pivoted. She became an actress in German mountain films, a popular genre celebrating physical prowess against dramatic alpine landscapes. She didn't just want to star in these films, she wanted to make them. In 1932, at just 30 years old, she directed her first feature film, The Blue Light. She starred in it, produced it, and edited it. The film won the silver medal at the Venice Film Festival. A woman directing and producing her own films in 1932 was virtually unheard of. Leni Riefenstahl was a genuine pioneer. That same year, she attended a Nazi rally. She later claimed she was mesmerized by Hitler's speech, describing it as almost mystical. Soon after, she wrote to Hitler directly, requesting a meeting. He agreed. The Führer, it turned out, was a fan of The Blue Light. A relationship began that would define both their legacies. In 1934, Hitler commissioned her to film the Nazi Party Congress in Nuremberg. The result was Triumph of the Will, a film that transformed political spectacle into high art. It remains one of the most analyzed and condemned films ever made. But it also proved Riefenstahl could make propaganda that didn't look like propaganda. When the Olympics came to Berlin, Riefenstahl was the obvious choice. She claimed the commission came from the International Olympic Committee, not the Nazis. Documents later proved otherwise. The Reich funded the film entirely. Hitler provided unlimited resources. She had a crew of over 100 cameramen and access no other filmmaker would receive. Yet what she created with these resources went far beyond simple propaganda. Olympia would revolutionize how we film sports, how we capture the human body in motion, and how documentaries could aspire to fine art. The question is whether that genius can be separated from its purpose. Let's set aside politics for a moment and examine what Riefenstahl actually achieved. Before Olympia, sports were typically filmed from fixed positions in the stands, much like spectators would see them. Riefenstahl rejected this entirely. She wanted viewers to feel they were inside the competition. She dug pits beside the track so cameras could shoot athletes from below, making them appear to soar against the sky. She placed cameras on catapults to follow sprinters. She mounted them on balloons for aerial shots. She even put cameras underwater in the diving pool, a first in film history. Her use of slow motion was revolutionary. In the diving sequences, athletes hang suspended in air, their bodies twisting through space like sculptures in motion. Time itself seems to stop. Modern sports broadcasts use this technique constantly, but Riefenstahl invented its artistic application. The editing took 2 years. From over 400,000 meters of film, she crafted 4 hours of finished footage. Her editing rhythm matched the athlete's movements, cutting on beats of action, creating a visual symphony from fragmented moments. The film's prologue connects ancient Greek athletics to the modern games through a sequence that transforms classical statues into living athletes. It's pure visual poetry, no dialogue, just bodies, movement, and Herbert Windt's score. Critics at the time called it unprecedented. They weren't exaggerating. She also filmed Jesse Owens extensively, the Black American athlete who won 4 gold medals. His victories embarrassed the Nazi narrative of Aryan supremacy, yet Riefenstahl gave him significant screen time, capturing his grace and dominance. This fact would become central to her later defense. The film won awards across Europe and impressed even critics hostile to Germany. Viewed purely as cinema, Olympia is a masterwork. But can anything created under these circumstances be viewed purely as cinema? Now let's watch Olympia differently. From the opening frames, Nazi iconography is everywhere. The camera lingers on swastika flags. Hitler appears repeatedly, his reactions given unusual prominence. The German national anthem plays over medal ceremonies even when other nations win. The film's prologue, with its celebration of classical Greek bodies, mirrors Nazi ideology about physical perfection. The Nazis claimed ancient Greece as an Aryan ancestor. The visual connection between Greek sculptures and German athletes wasn't subtle. It was the point. Riefenstahl's camera doesn't just observe bodies. It glorifies them in ways that align perfectly with Nazi aesthetics. Muscles gleam. Faces show noble suffering. Athletes become demigods. This wasn't neutral documentation. It was ideology made flesh and light. The film premiered on April 20th, 1938. That date was Adolf Hitler's 49th birthday. This was not coincidence. Olympia was presented as a gift to the Führer. At the premiere, Hitler sat in the place of honor. Riefenstahl sat beside him. Yet defenders point to the Jesse Owens footage. Would a pure propaganda film celebrate a black athlete defeating Aryan competitors? This complexity has allowed the debate to continue for decades. Riefenstahl herself weaponized this ambiguity for the rest of her life. But understanding Olympia requires understanding the relationship that made it possible. Because Leni Riefenstahl wasn't just an artist hired by the regime. Her connection to Hitler was far more personal. The historical record leaves little room for doubt. From 1932 onward, Riefenstahl had direct access to Hitler that few others enjoyed. She visited his mountain retreat at Berchtesgaden. She attended his private dinners. Albert Speer, Hitler's architect, described her as part of the Führer's inner circle. Hitler admired her work extravagantly. After seeing Triumph of the Will, he declared it an incomparable glorification of the power and beauty of our movement. He gave her unlimited budgets. He overruled Goebbels when the propaganda minister tried to interfere with her productions. For Olympia, she received approximately 1.8 million Reichsmarks, an enormous sum. Her production company operated with resources no independent filmmaker could match. She was given authority to commandeer Olympic venues for her shots. No one could refuse her requests. There were also the gypsies. In 1940, Riefenstahl used Romani prisoners from a detention camp as extras in her film Tiefland. After filming, they were sent to Auschwitz. Most did not survive. Riefenstahl denied knowledge of their fate for decades, but survivors contradicted her claims. She was present when German forces invaded Poland in 1939. Photographs show her in military uniform with Wehrmacht troops. She witnessed the aftermath of a massacre of Jewish civilians in Konski. She later claimed she was horrified and left immediately. Witnesses told different stories. None of this appears in Olympia, but knowing it changes how we see the film. Every frame was made possible by this relationship, this access, this complicity. The question becomes, how do we watch knowing what we now know? Propaganda doesn't need to be obvious to be effective. In fact, the most powerful propaganda often doesn't look like propaganda at all. Olympia's genius and its danger lies in how it embeds ideology into artistic choices that seem purely aesthetic. Consider the camera angles. When Hitler appears, he's often shot from below, a technique that makes subjects appear powerful and dominant. German athletes frequently receive heroic framing. Competitors from other nations rarely get the same treatment. These choices feel natural because they're consistent, but they're deeply political. The film's structure normalizes the Nazi regime. By presenting the Olympics as a triumph of organization and spectacle, Olympia implicitly endorses the system that produced them. Viewers around the world saw efficiency, order, and beauty. They didn't see concentration camps. The musical score, composed by Herbert Windt, reinforces these messages continuously. Triumphant orchestral swells accompany German victories. The music links athletic achievement to national glory. Viewers feel the emotional manipulation even when they don't consciously recognize it. Perhaps most insidious is the illusion of comprehensiveness. The film includes athletes of all nations, including Jesse Owens. This apparent fairness masks what's missing. There's no mention that Jewish athletes were excluded from the German team. The facade of inclusion disguises systematic exclusion. Modern scholars call this soft propaganda. It doesn't argue. It doesn't persuade through logic. It simply presents a version of reality so beautifully that viewers accept it as truth. In many ways, this makes Olympia more dangerous than cruder forms of political messaging. When Germany surrendered in 1945, Leni Riefenstahl was arrested by American forces. She spent nearly 4 years in detention and faced multiple denazification tribunals. Her defense would become a template she repeated for the rest of her life. She was an artist, not a Nazi. The tribunals ultimately classified her as a fellow traveler rather than an active Nazi. She was not convicted of war crimes, but this legal technicality did not restore her reputation. Hollywood and European studios refused to work with her. She became a pariah in the industry she had revolutionized. Her defense never varied. She claimed she was apolitical. She insisted she didn't know about the Holocaust. She said her films were art, not propaganda. She pointed to Jesse Owens as proof of her lack of racism. She maintained these positions until her death in 2003 at age 101. Historians have systematically dismantled these claims. Her appointment books showed meetings with Nazi leadership. Her letters revealed she knew about persecution. The premiere date on Hitler's birthday wasn't her choice, but she never objected. At every opportunity to distance herself, she drew closer instead. Yet she also never stopped working. She photographed the Nuba people of Sudan in the 1960s and 70s, producing celebrated images. She took up underwater photography in her 70s. She remained vital and creative until the end. This longevity complicated the narrative of a fallen propagandist. Some critics found Nazi aesthetics in her Nuba photographs too, the same glorification of physical perfection. Others saw genuine artistic evolution. The debate about Riefenstahl became a proxy for larger questions about art, complicity, and whether people can truly change. Can you separate art from the artist? This question has been asked about painters, musicians, writers, and filmmakers. But Olympia raises the stakes higher than almost any other work. Because here, the art itself may be inseparable from its political function. Some scholars argue we must engage with problematic art to understand how propaganda works. Susan Sontag, in her famous essay, Fascinating Fascism, warned that refusing to examine Riefenstahl's techniques leaves us vulnerable to similar manipulation. Understanding evil requires looking at it clearly. Others argue that celebrating Olympia's techniques inherently celebrates the system that produced them. Every viewing, every award, every film school screening normalizes what should remain condemned. Some wounds, they say, should not be aestheticized.